In the sprawling, sun-scorched ganglands of Southern California, there is a law that governs tens of thousands. A law born not in a statehouse, but in the blood-soaked yards of the prison system. It's the law of the number 13, Sereno. It signifies allegiance to a single, terrifying power, the Mexican mafia, LAM. In theory, this allegiance creates a unified Southern army, a brotherhood. But on the streets, that brotherhood is a lie. This is the story of one of those gangs. A gang that is not the biggest nor the most famous, but whose history reveals the brutal, contradictory, and complex reality of the Serenia world. They are a gang that has fought bloody wars with their supposed brothers, forged alliances that defy the prison system's racial edicts, and exported their brand of violence far beyond the borders of Los Angeles. This is the complete story of South Los 13. The story of South Los begins in the 1970s in the dense, multi-ethnic neighborhoods of South Central Los Angeles. Like many gangs of the era, it was born from a need for protection and identity. But as the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s set the city on fire, the mission changed. Protection turned to predation. Territory became everything. They established their heartland in the South Los Angeles area, a crucible of conflict where they were forced to contend with a complex patchwork of Dash, Blood, and other Sereno gangs. From this base, they operated under several names: South Los, Barrio South, and after pledging their mandatory allegiance to the Mexican mafia, South Los 13. This pledge was non-negotiable. To survive in the jail and prison system, you carried the 13 or you were a target. Of all their rivalries, the war with the Hoover criminals has been one of the most violent and personal. For decades, these two gangs have shed each other's blood over territory and respect. On Mother's Day, May 13, 2018, that war claimed the lives of two 15-year-old boys. Maya Jackson and Lamar Perch were walking home from a party just after 1:30 a.m. Carrying 3 members of South Los 13 pulled alongside them. The question was asked, the most loaded question in Los Angeles: "Where are you from?" Before the boys could answer, shots erupted. Jackson and Perch were killed instantly. Prosecutors would later argue the ambush was retaliation for a prior incident where one of the teens had allegedly brandished a pellet gun at a South Los member. For that, they were sentenced to death on the street. All 3 shooters received life in prison. This was not an isolated incident. On August 22, 2013, South Los member Sergio Jr. Vivos went hunting. He borrowed a white Yukon SUV and drove deep into Hoover territory. On the corner of Cotton and Vermont, he spotted a group of friends. He stopped, an arm extended from the passenger window, and he opened fire. 21-year-old Trevor Robertson was struck in the back and died from his wounds. Cell phone records, fingerprints on the Yukon, and Vivos' own attempts to create a false alibi sealed his fate. He was sentenced to 210 years to life. The war with the Hoovers was a war across racial lines, but South Los 13 was just as willing to wage war against its own. For decades, they have been locked in a bitter feud with another Sereno gang, Gardena 13. On the night of May 18, 1990, members of Gardena 13 were walking near Normandy Avenue. A dark van circled them twice. On the third pass, someone in the Gardena group flipped it off. That was all it took. The van stopped. South Los member Antonio Ambrose stepped out, walked toward the group, and asked, "Where are you from?" Again, he didn't wait for an answer. He pulled a revolver and fired 5 shots. Jaime Alvarez, a young man who was not a gang member, but was simply friends with the group, was hit 3 times and died on the sidewalk. Police spotted the van minutes later. The 2 suspects, Ambrose and the driver, Gutierrez, gave fake names and denied everything. So, the investigating sergeant tried a classic tactic. He put a hidden tape recorder in his squad car and left the two men alone. On tape, they were caught scrambling in Spanish to get their story straight. That recording, along with Amres's fingerprints on the murder weapon, sent them to prison. But the world of South Loss 13 is not just defined by its enemies. It's also defined by a shocking alliance that seems to violate the most sacred rules of the Mexican mafia. While they fight a bloody war with Florencia 13, another powerful Sereno gang, they have also been documented as having amicable relations with the East Coast Crips. This is a profound anomaly. The Mexican mafia has for decades pushed a violent anti-lac ideology, frequently ordering its Sereno foot soldiers to attack African-American gangs. In fact, Florencia 13 was one of LAM's primary enforcers of this racial cleansing, specifically targeting the East Coast Crips. Yet their rival, South Loss 13, forged a partnership with them. This suggests that on the streets of Los Angeles, local pragmatism, whether for shared drug profits or a common enemy, can be more powerful than the racist dictates of the prison shot callers. It is a crack in the foundation of the Sereno power structure, a secret handshake that defies the warden. In the late 1980s, the story of South Loss 13 takes an unexpected turn. It expands. But this isn't a random migration. It's a calculated transplant. The chapter begins when a mother, desperate to save her sons from the violence they themselves were creating in Los Angeles, moves her family 2 hours south to the quiet community of San Marcos. But they didn't leave the gang life behind. They brought it with them. The brothers, already hardened by the streets of South Central, saw San Marcos not as a refuge, but as new territory. They were older, more experienced, and carried the infamous reputation of an LA gang. To the local youth, they were idols. At the time, San Marcos had its own small, unstructured youth crews. The most prominent was a group called Los Pufos, or the Smurfs. They had no real leadership, no connection to the prison system. When the South-South Lost Brothers arrived with their structure, their ruthlessness, and their 13 affiliation, they were seen as the real deal. Recruitment was easy. In a pivotal meeting, the entire leadership of Los Pitufos was jumped into South Los. They became the South Los Baby Locos clique. And with that, the San Marcos chapter exploded. By the 1990s, South Los 13 in San Marcos had over 200 members. They dwarfed the local gang, Barrio San Marcos, and controlled the entire east side of the city. This area became known as Little TJ, or Little South Central. It was an open-air drug market, with methamphetamine and cocaine sold from businesses like the La Mojarita restaurant and on the streets of Autumn Drive and China Berry. They weren't just visitors, they owned the town. The local gang, Barrio San Marcos, or VSSM, took extreme offense to this invasion from Los Angeles. It ignited a war that would last for decades and claimed numerous lives. In June of 2006, the conflict reached a boiling point. Police who were wiretapping the phone of VSSM's leader, Cesar Snoop Madano, overheard a chilling conversation. A VSM member, Robert Loco Lopez, called for permission to retaliate. He believed a South Los member named Julio Menas Ramirez had stabbed a VSM member. Worse, there were rumors that South Los had desecrated a VSM grave. Lopez asked for the green light to raid Ramirez's home and kill him. Moto gave the authorization. 10 days later, on the night of June 14th, Lopez and other VSSM members chased down 2 South Los members. Surveillance cameras captured Lopez leading the pack, brandishing a knife. They caught Julio Ramirez and Jesse Reyes. Reyes was stabbed, but survived. Ramirez was not so lucky. He was stabbed 8 times. The fatal wound, a 4.5-inch deep strike to the back, pierced his lung and pulmonary artery. He bled to death in his own chest cavity. Robert Loco Lopez was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The war continued. On February 22, 2017, VSM member Eduardo Soel Manuel drove his white Jeep Liberty into South Los territory on Autumn Drive. He got into a heated argument with a rival. A witness heard him yell, "Fuck you in Southie!" Soul pulled a gun, but it appeared to jam. He got back in his Jeep, re-emerged, and fired 2 more shots. The victim escaped, but the bullet pierced the wall of an occupied apartment. So was arrested minutes later at a Jack in the Box. Despite having just used the restroom, his left palm tested positive for a single particle of gunshot residue. That particle, along with eyewitness identification, was enough. He was sentenced to 88 years to life. The war wasn't just fought on the streets, it followed them inside. For the San Marcos members of South Los 13, doing time in San Diego County Jail was a unique challenge. They were outsiders, an LA gang on San Diego turf. The established San Diego Sereno gangs would unite against them. They were outnumbered and faced constant hostility. In prison, they had no choice but to run with the LA car, the faction of inmates from Los Angeles. They had to fight harder than anyone to gain respect, enduring beatings just to stay on the main line. They were representing Los Angeles in enemy territory, both inside and out. So what happened to the 200-member deep army that once ran San Marcos? A combination of factors led to their decline. First, law enforcement. The city of San Marcos launched a targeted campaign resulting in mass arrests and deportations that took out most of the founding members. Second, gentrification. The city literally tore down their strongholds, replacing the ghetto apartments and streets with new developments. And finally, their enemies united. Barrio San Marcos formed a coalition with other local gangs like the Brown Pride Locos and Wolfpack. They joined forces with a single goal to push South Los 13 out. Today, the San Marcos chapter is a shadow of its former self. They're confined to just a couple of streets, but they are still there, still recruiting, and the war with VSM is still on. The story of South Los 13 doesn't end in Southern California. In a move that demonstrates the incredible reach of the prison system, the gang franchised itself across the country. But this expansion wasn't random. It was authorized. The process was revealed by a former member named Jose Ala. After moving from LA to Seattle, he decided to start a new chapter. But he didn't just declare it. He first had to call his cousin, who was incarcerated in a California prison, to get official authorization. This is the model. Every new chapter is a sanctioned outpost of the original, remaining loyal and crucially paying taxes back to the shot callers in California. Closer to home, the gang established a presence in the Inland Empire city of Rialto. This clique is known to have a rivalry with the Sage Street gang. Another chapter popped up in Azusa in the San Gabriel Valley. The story goes that a South Los member known as Miklo recruited a younger member who then moved to Isuza and was given the green light to start his own set. The gang's reach extends even into the Deep South. A chapter was established in Atlanta, Georgia. While details are scarce, its existence proves that the South Los 13 network is a national one capable of projecting its identity thousands of miles from its origin point. Perhaps most surprising is the report of a South Los 13 presence in Pennsylvania around 2016. A former associate mentioned friends being involved in the gang on the East Coast. How a Southern California Hispanic street gang established a clique on the other side of the country is unclear, but it speaks to the incredible mobility and cultural influence of the Sereno brand. It is a testament to a name that was forged in the South Bay of Los Angeles and is now whispered in the alleys of cities across America. The story of South Los 13 is a microcosm of the entire Sereno world. It's a story of brutal violence, of wars fought against enemies and brothers alike. It's a story of adaptation, of a gang that managed to survive in the hyper-competitive landscape of Los Angeles and successfully export its identity across the nation. They operate in a strategic sweet spot, notorious enough to be feared, but not so large as to attract the full, crushing weight of federal RICO indictments that have dismantled their rivals. They are a middle-tier threat, and that has been the key to their survival. This war, like countless others, continues. The names change, but the cycle of violence remains, forever altering the lives of the communities and the individuals caught in its grip.